I will open the council time meeting for Wednesday, January the 6th, and begin with old business, the minutes from the December 10th meeting. I was absent, as was Councilor Medvigi, it looks like.
Actually, Chair,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Chair. I'm sorry to interrupt, but actually, you were both at this meeting. I was going to mention that this is an error in the minutes.
Okay.
You both did miss a meeting, but it was the week prior. So.
Okay. December. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I thought I did think when I was looking at these minutes that I thought I heard Mitch give that report. And I thought, so, all right. I would, with that correction, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move to approve with the correction.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes with the correction that Councilor Medvigi and I were both at this meeting. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
And that was a belated aye.
Okay, good. All right.
I did not vote because I was not a counselor at that time.
That's right. Thank you, Councilor Bauerman. All right, moving on to the old business of ethics. We've been sent information from Lindsay. She did some research on what other jurisdictions do. I guess this is just to update us on what Lindsay has found and get our comments. Is that right, Kathleen?
Yes, that's correct. And also, if there's any additional information that you would like prior to the retreat next week, so Lindsay can do conduct any additional research that you may have or questions that you may have regarding ethics. So she can give a brief overview of what she researched already if you would like. Otherwise, it's really just obtaining feedback.
Would the council like to have Lindsay do a presentation, or do you have comments on what you've most likely have read that she has sent to us? What is your what's your pleasure?
In my case, I read what she sent. I see no need for further exploration of that unless someone else desires. But there is one other thing that I'd be interested in hearing from her or someone else to research, if this is the time for that.
I think it's time for that. Unless, are there any other councilor members that would like to have an overview from Lindsay?
So, Madam Chair, I had by email sent some further questions for Lindsay to look at, basically enforcement arms outside of the county, including the PA on certain issues. There are certain matters that have just come up that I want to take up as well during executive session today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm assuming here that we've all read what Lindsay has sent us, and so I'm going to give Councilor Bowerman the floor to make comments that she had, and anybody else who would like to make comment. I'll make some comments too about what we have been presented with, and to prepare us more for our retreat where we'll examine this. Councilor Bowerman.
I appreciated the discourse on who would do an evaluation, but I think to me that misses an element that is very important for exploration, which is what are the standards or rules for ethics for counselors. I used to be, as Dean of Business, very involved with the Cal CPA Association and their ethics groups. And one of the things that was developed there was a 300-page explanation of what the rules and standards are for ethics. Now, I'm not suggesting that we create 300 pages for the county, but I am suggesting that we become very clear on what constitutes an ethics violation. Are we talking about violations of the RCWs or the PDC or some kind of other financial malfeasance? So I'd like to see exploration of rules and standards beyond the little paragraph that we have in our rules at this time.
I would agree that in order for us to have anybody examining ethics complaints, I think that we need a very standardized and detailed rules by which this particular, whatever it is that we form, this council, this person, this, whatever we determine is the best way to handle this. So I'm wondering, I would also ask that Lindsay maybe check into if there were rules attached to these various councils that, or these appointees to these ethics commissions, which she cited, which are in, Tacoma and some other, Snohomish County, Pierce County, City of Tacoma, City of Kirkland, and Linwood. Maybe there's more that we can get from those. And it's possible that WASAC, and maybe that's where you went, Lindsay, but maybe WASAC or NACO also has some recommendations for the kind of thing that we're looking at. But what we have is clearly not sufficient.
Just one, I'm sorry. Just
yeah.
And that is the thing that we have to be very careful of, is to avoid the sense that if another counselor says something with which I happen to disagree or you happen to disagree, that somehow that becomes an ethics violation. And that's the real purpose of rules, so that we're clear on what constitutes a violation. And that's the only time that a body would be convened to make a ruling.
Madam Chair. Sorry, you're muted there. And I would agree with that. I think we have to make sure there's a clear delineation of an ethical violation or potential ethical violation or ethical behavior versus conduct, and what's in a code of conduct and how that's managed and how that's handled and who handles that and how we handle that. And I think that got conflated pretty clearly in our rules of procedure. So I think if we can make sure we are clear about those definitions, and to Councillor Bowerman's point, what is a clear ethical violation or potential ethical violation? What is that definition?
Yes, Madam Chair. Yeah, so far I concur with what's been said, and I agree that our whatever we come up with should be very clear so that everybody understands what a violation constitutes. Some additional information I was looking for. I appreciated the overview that Lindsay gave, and it was pretty thorough. And I especially appreciated the links to the actual codes for Snohomish and Tacoma, and being able to look at those more closely and actually see what they do. A request that I was going to have is if we could get Pierce as well. Pierce has a lot of similarities to us, and I think that they're a good model for us to look at it for a lot of things. So I'd love to see the actual language that they have. I thought that looking at Snohomish and Tacoma, their descriptions of what they have and what constitutes a violation, differ a little bit in terms of their clarity, but there's some useful information in both. And to follow on the conversation of how things are defined, if we could get additional information about, say, how Kirkland and Linwood define actual violations and what constitutes the standard of ethics, that'd be fantastic. The other, just to look a little bit more locally, you probably did this and perhaps there wasn't anything, but I'd love to know what the City of Vancouver may have and how they may address this as well, just since they're our neighbors. So thank you.
Other comments? Councilor Medvedji, were you going to delve in a little bit further?
There is a very specific issue I want to talk about during executive session. But I do want to echo everything that's been said so far. And if you recall, when we had that grouping of ethical complaints and we formed our ad hoc committee, I think I held up and I showed you our code of conduct and ethics book that the judiciary used in the state of California. And it's a hardbound 1,000-page book. And so it has opinions, administrative opinions, court opinions. I mean, there's a whole body of law behind these issues, not only of code of conduct and of ethics. I mean, it's a specialty. And there were independently assigned bodies to review and evaluate, just as our different legislative delegations that have large bodies of membership. And for many, many years, I was the ethics advisor for several commands as the head judge advocate general on not only code of conduct, but ethics. So this is a very complicated and deep issue. So for a council of 5 to police itself, I mean, I'm not so sure that all we can, and I appreciate all the additional information and questions councilors are asking. We should look at all that. But for a council of 5 to police itself with an entire body of law that may be missing will be very problematic. I think ultimately what we should do is openly discuss these issues and set a vision for how we expect to behave and conduct ourselves, both ethically and in the pursuit of our personal and public lives. But I'm not sure we can do much more than that. That's why I was asking specifically for what exists in the state for outside bodies beyond the PDC and the Attorney General and our local prosecuting attorney for those things that may bleed over into what could possibly be sanctioned through criminal statutes. So there's a lot of issues here. It's very difficult for a small body like ours to really address fully. So anyway, I will get into the specific issue I want to talk about in other discussion in executive session.
Madam Chair. Just one further comment. Once rules are developed, and again, my reference is back with the CPA, since that was the group that I had worked with most closely on this. After those rules are developed, then for the people who are going to make judgments on violations of the codes, there's training. And in the case of the CPAs, that training would be available online for a several-day period with a certificate offered at the end, whereby their qualifications to serve as an ethics judge was validated for a year. And then with any changes in rules or issues that had come about, there would be updates on that training. And again, they would need to go through and be validated for their knowledge of those additional things. So what I'm suggesting here is, again, not necessarily that we go overboard with a 3 or 5 day training program and certificates and so on, but that aspect of all of this not be ignored completely, because you can't just take someone who's had no experience with this, hand them a set of rules and expect them to know how to apply them. In fact, in these training sessions, they'll take the rules and a live situation and take the judges through that process so that they understand how to apply the rules. And all of that is really rather critical to have it being done fairly, because this affects people's lives.
I would agree. That's a good suggestion, because it would depend upon the commission that we, or that the group that we decide is going to be adjudicating this too. So all of this is really good information and good comments about how we should move forward. I'm not even sure that I'm pretty sure, actually, I'm going to say, I'm pretty sure we won't be able to complete this at our retreat at all. But we can start the discussion and start moving in that direction. Having been the subject to one of these, I think it is critical to have the code of conduct and ethics be considered differently. So at any rate, are there other comments about this item? Okay, we'll move on then to the next item, and this will be something that we at least start the discussion on in our retreat, and later for old business or new business, we're going to be looking also at the agenda. So we'll get there in a minute. The next item on old business is fireworks, and we have 3 counselors who would actually like to place this back on the agenda, and I just am kind of bringing this forward that it should be on the agenda on February the 2nd. And that is why it's on the agenda, so that you know that this is going to be coming up as a hearing.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Olson.
So clearly this body has that authority and luxury of doing that. I'm wondering that this ordinance that we passed in December won't take effect until the end of 2021. That I understand that there's a petition that's being circulated and signed with regard to a referendum on this. And I know in the past that we've talked about trying to put this on the ballot, and that we didn't actually have the authority to do that. But this referendum effort does give that opportunity. And I think if the ordinance is so bad and there's so much support to overturn it, that gathering those signatures would be reasonable, and having this on the ballot would be reasonable if the community decided that they didn't like this ordinance. So I guess I'm asking to consider that we've got time to see how that referendum petition is circulating, and that maybe we can get it on the ballot via that process. I mean, there's multiple processes here that we can take, or that can be taken, and that's one. And that does give the people an opportunity to be involved. So I would, I guess, ask that if we're considering as a body overturning this, that we give this referendum effort a little bit of time to see how that goes. The other thing I wanted to bring up is we did get an email yesterday about a very tragic death as related to these fireworks that we're allowed to sell here in this community. And that is that's the worst case scenario amongst all the other scenarios that we've been talking about over the last 3 years. So I'm just asking the majority here that wants to put this on the agenda, but maybe we have time.
Madam Chair, if I may comment. Thank you. So to some extent, I agree with what Julie had just said. I brought that up in my initial objection to moving forward during this period of restricted meetings, that we had originally, in deferring action on fireworks, had contemplated the cost of putting it on the ballot and letting the people vote. This is one of those issues that is, I mean, it is a showcase for balancing of issues, and to move forward with the ordinance as the council did at a time when the public really only could participate by sending an email in, I thought really eroded our democratic processes. So the part I agree with Julie on is that let the people speak. So at the last meeting, we had a sampling of that with quite a few emails not favoring the code changes, outnumbering those that did substantially. I did confirm with our elections office that there is a referendum process that has started. And so it's been filed, and they would be in the period of gathering signatures. There's 2 issues that result from that. One is there really isn't an official mechanism internal whether it's an initiative or a referendum under our charter. There's nothing official for anyone, whether the PA's office or the elections office, to notify the county council of that process having begun. I took a series of phone calls between myself and the election office to confirm that process. So where I split with Councillor Olson is I'd like to do exactly the opposite. I would like to act on the referendum now without putting them to the task of gathering signatures and get back to the status quo that we had. Give more time for enforcement, more time for education. And if there's inertia out in the public, to bring an initiative and let them gather the signatures to then put the restrictions in place. So I think we should act on the referendum and take the cue from the public, and let's get back to the status quo. And then if someone else wants to bring an initiative, they can do so. Or if we should later decide to go to the cost to simply put it on the ballot. But I did not support moving forward with consideration of the additional code restrictions under the COVID climate and our restrictions of our public meetings. I thought it really just completely undermined our ability to represent and allow the people to speak.
Just for clarification, we don't have the authority to put this on the ballot. We had this conversation last year, and that was ideally the way that we wanted to go, but we don't, as a body, have the authority to do that. So, so that was.
Yeah, an initiative can be brought, and so certainly not by us, but I mean, we, just like the city of Camas wrongly brought a pool initiative, and how they handle that, there are some lessons learned there. But initiatives can be brought under our charter by any body.
Okay, so and I would actually agree. I would say we had time. My viewpoint is we should have given time to actually allow the changes that had been made in the ordinance prior to this safe and sane in December. We should give time for that, for an education process for our people. And secondly, if we remove it, I agree with Councilor Medvegy. This kind of a controversial and important thing to many people in this county, bringing it forward when we can't have, personal local testimony or in-person testimony is a tough thing to do. And so that's one. Number two, if the public is so inclined that they want to place more restrictions on fireworks, it would perhaps be incumbent upon them to bring forward a referendum, gather the signatures, pay for the campaign, and make it known in the community to be able to do that. But with the majority of the council not actually wanting to make this more restrictive, I think it's incumbent upon us to undo what was done in December.
Chair?
Brian, I would like to just clarify a process. If the council chooses or wants to move this to a hearing, there will need to be a vote of the council for the record.
Okay, I think Councillor Lance wanted to say something.
Yes, just to weigh in my opinion, I concur with Councillor Olson that I think that the referendum that process that has already been started, that there's an opportunity here to, potentially meet both needs here of wanting to hear from the people. This process has already begun. And I believe last year at a time when we talked about this, when we were exploring whether or not we could put it on the ballot, most of the council actually would have been in favor of putting it on the ballot so that we could resolve this through voter voice. Then we learned that we are not able to do that as a council directed activity. So we have the opportunity to hear that. They've started the referendum process. There is still time, should that not go forward for whatever reason, there is still time within the first half of this year for the council that has the majority to overturn it to have that hearing yet this year and have it take place in time to affect the year that last year's vote affected. So I would suggest that that's a very reasonable proposition, and one that does, as we've all expressed we want to hear, it prioritizes the voter's voice.
And Madam Chair, actually, I think Councilor Lentz makes a good point in that if for some reason the referendum effort fails and they don't get the signatures, this council still has the ability at some point this year, we have till the end of the year, to reverse the original, to reverse what's in place right now. So we've had time. I mean, and we have lots of time, I guess, and we have a referendum process in place. And if it fails, you can change it later.
And Madam Chair, I would like to comment on those two last points. And on behalf of the constituents that Temple, Lentz, and Olson are representing, who want these restrictions, if this council were to delay and basically undo the code later in the year, that would give their constituents who want the code in place essentially no time whatsoever to bring an initiative and to gather all the thousands of signatures they would need to gather. So they pretty much foreclose the ability of an initiative process to bring the changes. So I think we should act now at the earliest to get back to the status quo.
Okay, any other comments? Then I would ask for a motion.
I'll make the motion, Madam Chair, to put it on the first available meeting with for hearing with public notice.
Madam Chair, I second that motion.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
No.
Motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to new business. The council retreat agenda. Have you all had a chance to look at it? And I would open up for comments on that agenda.
Madam Chair, one thing I don't see on here, which might fit somewhere in this part one, is just maybe an overall review of the charter. And one specifically area that I always really want to look at each year is the constituent response process. But I think it might be a good idea to just review the charter in general.
That sounds like a good suggestion as well. I mean, I agree with that. I wonder if that could be, Kathleen, I'm assuming that would be done probably by Taylor. And
that is correct.
okay, so if we can add that to the agenda as part of those three first bullets that are on the agenda, I would think, you know, that gives us foundation, maybe even the charter review first, and then the other items.
And if I can add, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Does that sound all right?
Well, I think the point that Julian's making is a really important one, because I don't sense that we've made much progress in consistent response. And, you know, we've had some turmoil in our assistants turning over, and then we had the pandemic, and then we had our email system revised, where a lot of our constituent emails went into junk. So I think we have a lot of progress to make on constituent response.
Other comments? Is it agreed then that we should go forward with having a charter review, probably the first thing, even before Finances 101?
I'd be supportive of that, and also ask an additional area that I'd like to be sure we focus on is the roles and responsibilities of legislative versus executive branch under the charter structure.
Okay, I mean, that is part of the charter, so
I'm taking notes.
it would be. Taylor?
Oh, I was just going to comment that I had noted all of the council's interest on that topic.
Okay, thank you. Other comments about, it looks to me, I mean, this is a pretty full agenda, even with part one. And so, you know, we've got this scheduled, I think it is from 10:30 to 3:30. Does that meet? Actually, I didn't look at my calendar. I just wrote those. Is that okay with everybody? Does that sound good?
Well, we have the second day also on the calendar in case. So
Okay.
I wouldn't want to go any later in the day. I think these are very substantive issues.
I will note as far as the policy overview, I'm planning on sending out to all of you by the end of this week a fairly robust chart of all of the policy projects that includes more information than the typical chart has. And, you know, in terms of the status and next steps, I think that at least on this initial retreat day, that we can focus on the project status and next steps, give you a chance to digest that overview. If you have questions, follow up, that I can get back to you hopefully before the retreat itself. And so hopefully at the retreat, we're talking about the status and next steps, what direction the council wants to go, rather than diving into each policy item in terms of the council. So that's my hope. So hopefully that doesn't take an extraordinarily long time. Obviously, it's up to the council in terms of how much time you want to spend on a topic, but I think that we can condense that down. And then if there's any further follow-up that you want to have on a particular policy item, we can schedule that as well.
Madam Chair, would you clarify, please, the second day that we're to hold for the retreat?
Yeah, I actually haven't even looked at my calendar, so I didn't know that was held for a second day. And
I just heard it, so that's why.
Just to clarify, this is Kathleen. There has not been one scheduled. That will be a discussion at the end of the first part or at the end of the first day to see where we're at and see if the council wants to continue through the next week. I anticipate it would be the following week if there's a second day needed.
okay, that sounds better to me than the following day, even though, you know, it's nice to follow on with information that we have and to continue to maintain continuity. However, I think my idea is that this was going to be at a future meeting, and so we can take those chunks. What Lindsay has said, though, about this, the overview, the project overview, we may be able to address that too. It really just depends upon the time that we have. So, and I think that what you've suggested, Lindsay, sounds good to me. How about you other counselors? Does what she has suggested, how she's going to present it, meet with your approval?
Yeah, and so I wanted to first, I guess I misunderstood my conversation with Kathleen and I thought we had a placeholder the very next day to have a 2-day retreat. And I'm fine with however you schedule future hearings. That's good with me. What I wanted to add, because we just had some discussion of the charter and executive and legislative. I was going to bring up during our discussion at the end what we had discussed with our Department of Health and our one-on-ones, and that gets to the issue of what does our Board of Health do, and what role does it have? What role do we have as counselors on that Board of Health? The governor has made that more important by promoting a new regional approach, and that's being laid out in this new plan, but also in general to revise how our boards of health across the state are constituted. So I think that's a related issue. And I was going to bring it up in the context of vaccinations and what Dr. Melnick is attempting to do with an incident response team, which I think is an imperative. And I think it's an imperative that the Board of Health should participate in. I know there's some disagreement with at least one counselor, maybe more. But in any case, that may be part of, Taylor, the discussion. Emily did give us kind of early on some of the legal parameters, the legal view. And the takeaway for me was that the director is the director, but as a Board of Health, if there are 3 votes, we can guide the policy decisions of the Board of Health as counselors. So that to me is a clear political role on the Board of Health on the part of the council. And I don't believe that's in play right now, because right now, at least from my point of view, Dr. Melnick is taking the correct steps in forming this incident response team in order to address the vaccination issue, which is really lagging in Clark County and the state and the country.
So do I understand you right, Councilor Medved? Are you requesting that we have a clearer mission for the Board of Health discussed at the retreat? Is that what you're asking for?
Yes, I was adding that to the discussion topic on the charter. And again, it's because of this very recent view that the governor wants to completely change the Board of Health for the entire state that it becomes even more relevant. I mean, the pandemic has made it very relevant from the very beginning, but now it's even more so as reform may be occurring at the executive level in the governor's office.
Okay.
Madam Chair, sorry.
Councilor Olson.
I just wanted to confirm on this, the policy review section, is that I was thinking that this was a prioritization exercise, and that we're not, like, as part of the retreat, we're not going to dig into the weeds on all of these policy issues, but that we're going to set up a prioritization process as how we want to tackle them over the next year. And so from a time perspective, if we don't get too far into the weeds on all of these things, we could probably do it in a reasonable period of time.
I think that is a possibility as well. I just think that there may be things on that list that will be set aside, and we may have higher priorities for other things. I don't know that. I haven't even thought, but we are a different council. It may take a different direction. I don't know what will happen with that, but I agree, Councilor Olson, that it should be more a prioritization and just kind of a reminder about what is going, where we are with some things, etc. And it should actually be a fairly quick thing, as Lindsay really suggested. And there may be other times when we get our updates on what's happening with various things. I regret, that this entire past year, because we haven't had in-person meetings, etc., it's limited the public to participate. And that's a big regret of mine, because it seems like, we feel like we can't do big things because the public isn't there. We represent them. And so, we're hearing from them somewhat, but it's muted. So,
and actually, maybe this is something we can talk about as well. Just piggybacking on that comment, to try to get more engaged public participation and public comment is, I think we touched on this a little bit last year, but didn't really spend any time on it. But the idea of moving our meetings back to the evening and taking public comment via phone, like I think a lot of other jurisdictions do. So rather than having open public comment, in the hearing room, we actually take it in our meeting as we would if we were in person, but we just take it over the phone, and we move our meetings back to 6 o'clock on Tuesday evenings. So it's something we can talk about next week if we want to, but that would help with that public process.
One thing want to follow up in Councilor Olson's prior remarks regarding the policy overview. I will send out that detailed information. Please do let me know if you have questions, because I will note that we won't have the staff policy experts on each of these. So you'll be relying on me. And of course, I don't have the detailed knowledge that our experts in the individual departments do. So if you have questions, let me know ahead of time so that I can track down that information for you. So that's part of why I expect the conversation to be short. If there's a particular item that comes up that I'm getting a number of questions about, I can reach out to that staff person to make sure that they're available at the time. But it's not my intent to have all of the staff experts available on that day.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. That helps clarify. So it's our responsibility then. Your responsibility to get that detail out to us, our responsibility to read it and go through it before the retreat. So thank you.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Baumann.
I just didn't catch what happened with the decision on Board of Health. Is that added to the opening discussion on the charter? Or where is that? Or is it on the agenda?
Well, I guess that we should move to add that to the agenda if there is an interest of the council to do that.
Personally, I think it's a good idea. I would support that.
So Taylor, or maybe Amanda, maybe this is Amanda's area, but it would be good to get again an overview of the RCW with regard to the Board of Health and what the roles are.
Yeah, and I guess I think that's a discussion that we can certainly have. I'm a little bit concerned that getting that discussion together before mid next week could be a little bit challenging. So I guess in the event that, I guess to the extent it's not immediately an issue, I would suggest possibly that we have that discussion at a later date, but where we could have a little bit more time to prepare for that, as well as a better idea of whether it is going to be relevant to the council's kind of decision making.
So the only thing I would say to that is I think you should have Emily's notes available to you, and that would be an overview. And I agree, certainly on any one of these topics, we may simply say we need to have a work session a month from today on this issue. We milestones on progress. Yeah, there's just so much work. Otherwise, this would be a 1 week long retreat. We get into the substance on each and every issue. But I would at least like you to condense what Emily had already presented to us, if you have that available. If it's been lost by her transition, then
I'm sure I can put together something through that information as well as my own before next week. If the expectation is an overview.
I think an overview would be good, and therefore it may not be possible, or it may not be. Amanda may not have to come if you can give us an overview, and especially if and when the governor changes what's happening regionally with the boards of health and how he's setting that up. We definitely will need a work session on that, at least an hour.
I will note on the Board of Health, those changes, that would require legislative action. So that's something that Josh and I are monitoring. And to the extent that the legislature moves forward, I'll bring it to council time to see if there are councilors who would want to go and not go, but testify in whatever form that they are having it at that point in time. Right now, they're at least going to be starting remote, and I anticipate that through the majority of the session. But it's something Josh and I are tracking, and we'll keep you updated. But it is not something that the governor can just unilaterally implement.
Great, good to know.
And
okay, so
to
who's speaking?
This is Kathleen. I do have the previous information that's been shared with the council regarding the Board of Health, and I will forward that to all of you and Taylor.
And
okay, thank you. Councilor Lentz?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on to this Board of Health. I think that an overview will be very good. And I'm participating in a work group that WASAC convened with Wasac and Wasalfo to formulate a statewide response to whatever does come forward from the governor. So that all of our organizations can lobby effectively in a unified way across the state. The response is largely that local control of boards of health is the preference. So we'll have more information on that as we continue to meet as well.
Okay. All right. So Board of Health, a brief overview will be added to the agenda. And I'm assuming that notes are being taken on what's going on this agenda. So far, I've got charter review, Board of Health review. On the charter review first, Board of Health maybe, and then finance, open public meetings, etc. Just add that to the top part of the agenda, or maybe Board of Health later in the meeting, whatever. Anyway, get it on the agenda, basically.
I also have the constituent response process.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay. Have we thoroughly then looked at the agenda for the retreat? If we have, we can move on then to work session requests. Are there any work session requests at this time, Lindsay?
Not that I'm aware of. No, not unless Kathleen knows of something I don't, but there aren't any on the agenda.
There is one thing that has been brought to my attention actually by Identity Clark County. And I wanted to bring this up for members of the council to see if they would be interested. I think it would be a very good educational process on aggregate in our county and bringing some professionals forward to kind of give us a little bit of an overview and an education on the aggregate in our county and how we should handle it, surface mining overlay, etc. And what we could do is, I think there are several entities that want to participate in that, private sector or, associations, whatever. And we would also invite Ahmad and probably Oliver because that's also part of the planning, the GMA planning process, is surface mining overlay. Is there? I would hope there would be an interest. Let me put it that way, since ICC is actually kind of asked that we do this. Would that be something that we can have on our agenda early in the year, whether if it doesn't fit in January, maybe in February sometime? Is there willingness by the council to do that?
So, Madam Chair, I absolutely have that high on my own list, and I've heard quite a bit. And as we all have heard about Washougal Pit and Livingston and what the future of that is, and the need for aggregate and the sky-high cost of aggregate, especially in the East County. And a lot of our construction tradesmen are going to Oregon and buying their material as a result of the scarcity of this stuff. That we have a carbon footprint, we have trucks in residential areas. I mean, there are so many issues that we need to take a relook strategically at our overlay. So I heartily support that. I'm hoping we can add that to our long list of things to accomplish in this year following the pandemic that we're still in.
Madam Chair, I really second that. I think that is of critical importance, not just to the building community, but also to those who are looking for affordable housing availability. It is central to what we do for commercial development and so on. So the sooner the better that we can get to it. I think that's wonderful. Is that for a work session request then? Because
yes,
that's
I'm
what I
thinking
would
it
like
would
to
be.
see. Yeah,
that would be a work session. So Lindsay, I can, perhaps I know Kathleen, we meet with ICC on a monthly basis, but it may be something we can you and Kathleen, Kathleen can maybe inform you, and you can be in touch with Ron Arp or whomever. And then also speak with our staff members to include them in on this discussion. Are there other work session requests?
Madam Chair, if I might. Yeah, I actually would support this as well in case you wanted my input on that.
I'm sorry, I should have actually continued to ask for the council's input on it. I had noticed that I also skipped councilor reports, so I wanted to get done with one thing and go back to that. But thank you, Councilor Olson, appreciate that. So I'm going to go back up to councilor reports. Are there councilor reports?
So I don't know if this relates to a future work session. It's something I think each of us may have been approached by the hearing impaired community on a presentation. And so, especially in this time where we're all on Zoom and there's additional challenges we're relating to our public. And I think the same presentation was made to the Vancouver City Council. I had asked generally I think Kathleen, I hope I did ask you that we need to find out first of all, what does the law require in signing and accommodation for our hearing impaired, of which I am one. And then what can we do beyond that? We have a lot of local resources for, I don't know what it's called locally. I used to call it real time as a judge. I could see on my desk, I always had a court reporter that would put up on my screen everything that was said in the courtroom instantaneously. It's like closed captioning. We have a lot of resources locally for that. And I understand between CVTV and the county, we go out of state sometimes for those resources. So it's a topic we need to do better on to accommodate all hearing impaired. So I did want to raise that as not only a council report, but maybe we do need to have a session on it at some point soon.
Chair?
Councilor Lentz.
I absolutely concur. When David Poland, the member of the deaf community, first approached me and we talked about it, I said that he definitely needed to get in touch with the rest of the council, especially Councilor Medvedji with your personal relationship to the issue. But I think that it would be very good, and I think hopefully the rest of the council has connected with him. He presents a very strong case. And perhaps a work session where we do hear from him and perhaps other representatives of the deaf community, but also hear from our legal department about how we can be sure that we are complying with the law, and we can have a discussion about what we need to be sure we're compliant, and are there things we can do that go a bit further to further increase accessibility for our population.
Point well taken. I don't know whether that would require an entire work session, maybe 30 minutes or something. We could probably get the legal background and some of the other elements that would be included in making it more accessible, whether it's funding, signers, or court reporters, or whatever it is. We would need to bring that all into that session. So I would agree that, that would be a good subject for a work session, and that pretty expediently, because we are still remote and we need to make this accessible to those individuals for sure. So if we can get that at least 30 minutes on the schedule, I'm thinking that should be enough time. I'm wondering council input, whether you think that would be sufficient time. Okay, I kind of see some heads nodding. If not, please speak up and say you think we need more time. But I think we should schedule at least 30 minutes for this in the very near future. So if you're listening, Lindsay, that's under a council report and work session request.
We'll keep going on that.
Okay, thank you. Are there other counselor reports? Okay, and so we'll go then. Are there any other work session requests, Lindsay?
No.
Okay. Policy issues, do you have a policy issue report?
The one thing I will note is, of course, now we are in January, and so our legislative briefings with Josh will begin on Monday. And so we actually are doing a different format this year because the legislature is going to be remote. And so we will have our usual Monday calls that will just be with Josh and Annika and the council. And of course, they'll do their written updates as well that they will send out to everybody. And then in addition to that, we have Friday delegation briefings that you'll see on your council or on your calendar rather. Those are with the Clark County delegation. And so if something comes up in a Monday call that you want to make sure we talk about with the delegation on the Friday calls, make sure to let Josh know and he'll get that on the agenda that he sends out to folks. So if you see two, don't be confused, and those are starting next week.
Madam Chair.
So,
I did get a reach out from one or two of our local delegation with regard to the calls are scheduled each Friday.
I will need to check. I think they're every other Friday.
Okay. And so the only comment was if we don't have anything new and there's not something pressing that we don't, because they're super busy and they anticipate that this remote thing is going to be a bit of a challenge for them. So that if it's not something pertinent and new, that we don't need to have the call. That's the only.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what Josh and Annika have communicated to them as well, that we're not going to just take the time to take the time, but we'd rather have something on the calendar and cancel it than try and find time that works for everybody.
okay, so watch your calendars, everybody. Okay, moving on then to, we are going to go into executive session. I believe this is still true, 2 pending litigation for 30 minutes, 1 potential litigation for 10 minutes, and RCW 423110 for 15 minutes. And there is possible action at the end. So,
the clarification, there will be an additional potential litigation for 15 minutes.
okay.
And I believe there's no action that Taylor can confirm.
There's no action for the action that I had been prepared to discuss, but Chair Quiring, I think you had indicated there was potential action for another matter.
Right. Okay, so we will sign off of this. And so how many minutes? Let's see, we've got 25, 30, and 15. So that is a little over 90 minutes, 110 minutes. Is that what is my math right? That was quick, but so if we do have action, we will come back into this webinar, WebEx, to take that action. Otherwise, we will leave this and go to our calendar for the executive session. All right. So I guess we're not adjourned. And okay, let me ask you that, Taylor. If I adjourn, then we can't take action, or can we reconvene if we have action? Or what do I do?
I think indicating that we are going to retire or convene an executive session, and you would come back to this meeting regardless to adjourn after executive session, whether or not there's action.
Okay. All righty.
Madam Chair,
Okay.
are we
Councilor Barman.
Are we coming back in 5 minutes, or are we coming back at the announced time at noon?
Oh, what about that?
I would recommend that council take 5-minute break before we convene executive session.
Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, but we can go into executive session once that 5-minute break is over.
Yes, executive session is ready for you to enter.
All right, thanks so much. We're adjourned, yeah, bye. back in session after the executive session, and there is no action, so we are adjourned. Thank you.